So do the treatment models for women need to change?
You are so good. You are a really good interviewer. I'm serious, because I that's the first thing I thought about when I said that. I need to talk about treatment. Yes, they do need to change, and that's one of the things. It's interesting. The research that we have on addiction and on alcoholism, it was primarily done in male populations in VA hospitals.
Now that I wasn't aware of.
Yes, absolutely, because that was kind of a set population that could be accessed.
Yeah,
and
combat, that's
right.
certainly is a woman's role in world.
And that's right, not.
Yeah.
And so back in the 50s, even into the 40s and 50s, that a lot of the treatment programs were constructed around that particular population, older males, VA hospitals.
Confrontational.
Yeah. And so here we sit talking about women in addiction and recovery, and you are so on target. What we have to do is we have to do that differently. That when you look at treatment for women, there's some other things that you have to look at. A lot of times it's really important to look at trauma work. A lot of women have gone through trauma either from families of origin or nuclear families. And I don't believe any woman's program is complete without a trauma track somewhere if needed. I think you have to look at the roles that women play in family. So I think family therapy and family work in women's treatment is incredibly important. If you only treat the individual person and you haven't done anything to help with what that family looks like, you have done an incomplete job of getting, and I think that's true of men too, and so I need to say that, but I think for women it is especially important. One of the major deterrents to women getting treatment are their children. You know, a man can go off to treatment and leave mom home with the kids. Well, oftentimes if mom needs to go to treatment, that same option is not available for her. And so some treatment centers have been somewhat experimental in trying to treat mom and children together. And that's difficult, but it's an ideal situation, especially if there are younger children, to not separate them out. Treatment also has to look at that, as you mentioned, confrontational. Many women don't do well in confrontational therapy settings, so using more of a cognitive behavioral approach or more of a spiritual approach, more of a rational emotive kind of approach, you know, can be better. And so I think you have to look at treatment a little bit different. The other thing that no one likes to hear is that I think oftentimes women need to stay in treatment longer because
really?
they have worked harder to cover up.
Oh, that makes sense.
They have worked so hard to cover up. They've built an image. And I think sometimes breaking through that is sometimes more difficult because their ability to cover up has been stronger. You don't find a lot of men that we call closet drinkers, but you find a significant number of women that you find closet drinkers because they drink in secrecy, they drink in privacy, and dealing with that level of alcoholism is a little bit different.
I'm thinking about some young women that I know who have said, and I know this is their motivation, I'm going to go out tonight and get blasted. Their goal was drink to oblivion.
Right.
And that was their goal for the weekend.
Right.
And I've always associated that more, my stereotype, with men.
Right.
You know,
right.
How many shots can you take, and the competitiveness of that. Is there a shift in how women drink depending on the age group in which they are?
Yes, you really did read the book. Yes, there is. I think one of the chapters in there is called, BFFs, Best Friends Forever, and there is a shift. Younger girls, and this is a sad thing, younger girls are engaging more in binge drinking than they were 10 years ago, even probably 5 years ago. And where the intent of binge drinking is to get drunk. The intent of social drinking is to relax a little bit, socialize, maybe take a little bit of edge off those inhibitions. That is not the intent of binge drinking. The intent of binge drinking is escaping into oblivion. and hopefully not throwing up all over yourself while you're doing it. And we're finding younger and younger girls that are dealing with this type of drinking rather than, you know, just being an all-male thing. One of the things that's interesting, and I think it's worth mentioning, no attack on the media, let me say that, but girls were marketed to. I mean, there was a part of the population that the alcohol industry had not tapped into 20 years ago, even 10 years ago. You know, guys drank beer. What did girls drink? Nothing. There really wasn't anything to drink. Thus the invention of the pink, bubbly wine spritzer. Or the cute little...
I was thinking wine coolers.
Wine coolers, wine spritzers, daiquiri, you know, little strawberry
drinks.
daiquiris and whatever. And part of what happened, and happened with cigarette smoking also, which is interesting because, you know, women didn't really want to smoke Marlboros, you know, but Virginia Slims were a little bit, you know, sexy and suggestive, and that might be good. Marketing did the same thing with alcohol with girls, and so where typically you wouldn't see age of onset for female drinkers till maybe into college, you began starting to see it in high school because they had an acceptable wine cooler to drink that was pink and bubbly and sweet and tasted good. And then you began to see some of that even in junior high school. And so part of what has happened with girls drinking, which is an interesting phenomenon to me, is not as much maybe sociological evolution as it is a marketing evolution. That all of a sudden there was something that was acceptable to drink. I remember back, you know, when I was in school, which was like a long time ago, but, you know, girls just didn't drink beers because it just wasn't very feminine. You know, that's what guys did. Well, the liquor industry has changed that significantly. And so you find girls that at a younger age drink to oblivion because that's what they want to experience, and they now have the means to do it.
I'm connecting a piece that what you're saying with media with part of another book that I'm reading. And the research that was reported in there had to look at the association between television viewing and violence, which the conclusion was the more television viewing, the greater the violence was. But with neuroscience studies, what the reporting was is that even programs like as innocent as Leave It to Beaver or Mother Knows Best back in the 50s, what television does is it heightens the limbic emotional system, so you get an emotional rush minus a cognitive rational analysis piece.
Oh, fabulous.
Combine that with drinking.
Absolutely.
So the more you watch television, and I'm going to claim that maybe the show Jeopardy is the exception because you've got to think.
That's right. I know.
Thinking person's game show.
And I do love Jeopardy.
But you know, why do I watch television? I don't watch much of it. It's because I'm too tired and I don't want to think.
That's right.
And so any type of viewing, movies, videos, any type of that is challenging, is training us to turn off our analytical, rational decision-making mode and enhancing our emotional responses in our limbic system without the guidance
absolutely
of an analytical process.
Right. And I think I think that example, which is really good in the use of alcohol, it comes together in that sense of escape.
Yes.
It is really about escape.
And anxiety management.
Absolutely. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to dwell on it. I don't want to be sitting in it. And if I turn on, you know, whatever the show is, then that offers me some level of escape. Absolutely. That is totally correct. You know, one of the things that I think is interesting, and I think that there's a real spiritual basis for this also, is that somehow we appropriately and yet maybe to our own deficit, we want to escape reality and pain. and nobody wants to be in pain, but I think more than ever culturally, and certainly I found that in
the United States, I think that's really true.
And I found that in interviewing women for this book, is that there is this tremendous desire to escape from whatever the moment of reality is. And I think that television, movies, drinking, all those things provide that kind of escape.
What fairy tale has not ended with, and they all lived happily ever
that's
after?
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And they struggled for the rest of their lives with issues about this and that and the other thing, and yet they survived.
Right.
Yeah.
And really, I mean, alcoholism and addiction is really, at its most basic form, is seeking out an altered state of consciousness. And that really is it. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. I mean, I can go run for 5 or 6 or 8 miles, and I feel better, you know. And so that's the same thing. You know, there are people that get addicted to exercise, you know, in that same way, because it's always that sense of what can I do just to feel a little bit more comfortable, a little bit calmer, a little bit. Prayer and meditation is a great way of a calming effect on the body. And so there are ways to do that, but underneath all of it is that desire to kind of escape from this moment. So.
I know that you've developed programs for universities to help students in recovery stay, thrive, and succeed. Could you talk about how some of those principles might translate into the local church setting?
Yes, I can. And that's a great question. What we've done a lot is develop what we call collegiate recovery communities. And so at any given point, that can be, doesn't have to be collegiate, but I think what you transfer into the local church setting is a place where people come together, a place where it's safe to share their secrets, a place that is all kind of open for people to drop in and visit and talk about what they're struggling with. I think that one of the struggles we all have in looking at recovery within church sometimes is, gosh, everybody's supposed to look good. And in recovery, it's important to just be where you are, which is a mess. A mess. And so I think churches opening their doors and beginning the dialogue to understand that. I will never forget one time going to a church and the minister getting up and beginning the sermon and said, I'm Tom and I'm a recovering alcoholic. And the whole congregation was like, because those kind of dialogues just didn't happen in church. And so I think the beginning of making it okay to not be okay is probably the first movement that churches can make. I think youth ministers, I was a youth minister one summer of my life. And I will never forget that. Just the intensity with which you could relate to the kids. I loved it. And I think, in terms of this population, certainly having a youth minister or a college minister or a woman in charge of women's ministry, wherever the struggle is, to have someone that people are willing to talk to that will listen, and that will listen appropriately, as you mentioned earlier today. What a gift! You don't have to be a therapist. You don't have to be an addiction counselor. You don't have to be a clinical psychologist. What you have to be is someone that is willing to hear someone's struggle with the grace and the compassion that God gave us to love each other. And if you can do that, then you have I think, from my perspective, spiritually, you have done what God has asked us to do for each other, is to love one another at that level of our own pain.
Kind of truthing it in love.
Yes, absolutely.
Or loving it in truth,
absolutely.
however you want to put it.
Absolutely.
Well, Kitty, thank you so much for sitting down and chatting with me about one of your passions.
Thank you. Thank you for having good questions.
Oh, you're welcome.
I appreciate it.
You're welcome.